Hurricane Milton crashed through the state yesterday, killing at least 16 people.
We find ourselves on the front lines of a crisis we did not create. Let us not allow future generations to look back and wonder why the cause of their doom was condoned.
How dare you!
What if I told you that just 100 companies are responsible for 70% of the world's CO2 emissions? Or that a private jet emits as much CO2 in 1 hour as a person in a whole year? What if I told you that most of the plastic waste we think we're recycling is shipped off to countries ill-equipped to handle it, where it ends up choking rivers, piling up in landfills, or polluting the oceans? It kinda seems like this entire system isn't designed to protect the Earth, but to shield the industries creating the mess in the first place. But let's talk facts. Just 100 companies are responsible for a staggering 71% of global emissions. Think about that. All your efforts combined can't compete with the emissions ExxonMobil or BP pumps out in a single day. These companies and the industries they dominate are the real problem. Yet they've managed to shift the blame onto us. Drive less, don't fly, save water. It's clear, isn't it? Meanwhile, they lobby for fossil fuel subsidies and keep extracting resources at an unrelenting pace. Experts suggest that 2 to 4 trillion is needed to modernize the US grid for renewable energy, and that 1.5 to 2.5 trillion for the EU. But those numbers only hold up if material prices stay stable. Factor in inflation and the skyrocketing cost of lithium, cobalt, and copper, and those numbers could easily double or triple. Add to that the fact that China controls much of the supply chain for rare earth minerals. Any geopolitical tension could set prices spiraling even higher. For the US to switch to renewables, it would need to produce 150% more energy, all of it renewable, compared to the current 20% of clean energy, which I'll come back to later. The same goes for the EU, which would also need to scale up renewables by a significant percentage to make the transition happen. Suddenly, transitioning to renewables becomes less about saving the planet and more about surviving the economic whiplash. CO2 certificates, also known as carbon credits, are used to offset greenhouse gas emissions. Companies or countries that produce excessive carbon dioxide can purchase these credits from projects that reduce or capture CO2 elsewhere. The idea is that by supporting these emission reduction projects, companies can balance out their own environmental impact. Let me explain. You have a forest. Forest naturally absorbs CO2 from the atmosphere. You can apply for CO2 certificates proving that your forest is helping reduce CO2 levels. You get a certain amount of CO2 certificates depending on how much CO2 the forest absorbs. On average, a mature tree can absorb approximately 22 kilograms or 48 pounds of CO2 every year. Now that you have your certificates, you can sell them on the markets to a businessman. This businessman owns a factory. His factory releases a lot of CO2. The businessman buys CO2 certificates equivalent to the CO2 his company emits. This allows him to legally say, "I've balanced out my emissions," even though his factory is still producing CO2, which means he is now running a green business. Just because somebody said it was green, it doesn't mean that it is. Like in every industry, wherever there's money to be made, you'll find scammers. There's been many reports of people registering non-existent forests as their own to be able to sell CO2 certificates. And don't even get me started on China. Now let's get back to those 20% renewable energy. The actual number is way lower, since many energy producers use CO2 certificates to offset their carbon emissions. So when I said the US would need to produce 150% more energy than it produces now, and all of it renewable, it puts a whole new shine on the already existing problem it faces. Storing renewable energy? It's not cheap. Large-scale storage in the US would cost $500 billion to $1 trillion easy. And guess what? Those batteries require the same rare earth minerals mined in countries where workers endure horrific conditions. Poisoned water, destroyed ecosystems, and unsafe labor practices. This is the real cost of going green. Let's be honest, we're not saving the world. We're outsourcing the destruction to those who can't fight back. A single electric truck consumes 200,000 kilowatt hours a year. Multiply that by 100 trucks, and you've got 20 gigawatt hours, 33 times more than what 100 households use annually. So while electric trucks reduce tailpipe emissions, they demand a colossal amount of energy. Now take Germany. In 2022, it imported 44.7 terawatt hours of electricity, partly because of its growing fleet of electric cars. That's just cars, vehicles deemed essential in the transition. If Germany scaled up to electric trucks, energy demand would surge, overwhelming grids and forcing even more reliance on imports. Not to mention the fact that CEOs of major energy companies are now warning the public about potential blackouts, citing the unpredictability of wind and solar power, particularly the limited sunshine during winter months. Adding to the problem is the fact that Germany's neighboring countries are increasingly reluctant to sell them energy, as Germany's erratic purchasing patterns are causing price fluctuations in their own markets. So in short, we have a grid that can't support the transition to renewable energies. Energy demand is rising exponentially to a point where we can't produce as much as we would need. And if we tried, the economy would collapse under the transition if we tried to do it in the next 20 years. They told us recycling was the answer, that sorting our plastic, paper, and glass would save the planet. But what if that was never the truth? Every year, millions of tons of plastic waste are shipped from countries like the United States to Asia. Places like Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines become the dumping grounds for the West's garbage. Yet these nations lack the infrastructure to handle it. Studies show over 75% of plastic in our oceans comes from mismanaged waste in Asian countries, waste they didn't even produce. Why does this happen? Because exporting trash is cheaper than solving the problem at home. And as the garbage piles up, only 9% of all plastic ever produced have been recycled. The rest, burned, buried, or worse, washed into our seas. Recycling was sold to us as a solution, but in reality, it's a distraction. A feel-good story to make us believe we're helping. Meanwhile, plastic production has doubled in the last 2 decades. Corporations still churn out billions of disposable products every year, knowing full well their impact on the planet. Recycling isn't fixing the problem, it's letting it fester. We're not reducing consumption, we're not holding producers accountable. And as long as the myth of recycling persists, we'll stay trapped in a cycle that profits industries while our planet pays the price. This isn't just about your reusable bags or shoulder showers. It's about a system designed to exploit, pollute, and profit. Individual actions, while commendable, are not enough. What we need is systemic change. Hold corporations accountable. Make the biggest polluters pay for their emissions. Fair resource extraction. Demand ethical labor practices and environmental protections for mining operations. Revolutionize policy. Push governments to prioritize renewable energy, enforce stricter emission standards, and invest in equitable solutions in a way that would not crash our economy in a decade. Here's the harsh truth. You won't save the world alone, but together, by demanding systemic change, holding the powerful accountable, and refusing to accept band-aid solutions, we just might. So, the next time you toss a bottle into the blue bin, ask yourself, are you really saving the world? Or just playing along in a game rigged from the start?